Welcome to When Movies Were Good, a laid-back discussion about all your favourite films from the silent era up until 1959. You can hear our channel's content on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and follow all new updates and events on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Please give us a thumbs up or a good review, whatever your favourite podcast channel allows for. It helps to get us in front of more people. And now, on with the show.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another edition of When Movies Were Good here at the Resort Studios, aka my back flat, here in the great city of Melbourne, which has certainly seen better days, but that's fine. And I'm here with my usual guest star, the Jonathan Harris of the podcast, Matt.
Hi. I was working on that for ages.
Yeah. You actually missed out on mine and Matt's great interpretation of I've Got a Golden Ticket from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes, well, to look at me, you'd think I'd practiced the inspiration of the song too much.
It was a completely pointless rendition, but we enjoyed it nonetheless.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Yeah, we'll save that for another time, though, because we are doing our Christmas special this year. This will be our last show for the year, but never fear, we will be back early in the new year to start, hopefully, 2022 anew. So, Matt, we're doing our Christmas special, and of course we have two beautiful, gorgeous films, one in glorious Technicolor, the other one in black and white. So we're doing Meet Me in St. Louis, a beautiful vehicle for Judy Garland, directed by her also husband, Vincent Minnelli, 1944, and then Miracle on 34th Street, which is a favourite with everyone and has been remade several times. Actually, so is Meet Me in St. Louis. I've had a couple of TV versions of that as well, and that's 1947 with the beautiful Maureen O'Hara and, of course, young Natalie Wood. So, Matt, two very famous and well-known family favourites.
Yeah, well, it was two great films to end this year's season on. I wonder actually if we'll ever run out of Christmas specials for our podcast, because obviously there are only so many Christmas films, but mind you, maybe we'll find some sort of pre-1959 version of Die Hard.
Yeah.
Where it just has some very flimsy pretext for being a Christmas film. But fortunately for this year, we had two very great films to choose from. And for those who don't know, Meet Me in St. Louis, one of the main reasons why you have to regard it as a Christmas movie is because it introduced a very famous Christmas carol to the international repertoire. Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Have yourself... Sorry. Yes,
we're getting ready for the merchandise album.
Actually, and so Meet Me in St. Louis, just for those who are or may not be familiar with the film, it's technically billed as a Christmas musical film. It's 1944 by MGM, but it's rather divided into seasonal, I guess, mini-stories or vignettes, starting with the summer of 1903. So shot in 1943-44, but we're actually going, so obviously St. Louis is the big city in Missouri, and at that particular time, there was a World Expo, a World Fair, that was being held in St. Louis, and they actually built a lot of things in the city for this fair. So it was technically called the Louisiana Purchase Exposition because it was celebrating the 100th anniversary of when they bought Louisiana from the French, I believe it was. So it was just basically a massive excuse, and they used to have these world fairs all the time. We had one here in 1988 in Brisbane. It was the Brisbane World Expo, but apparently they don't have them anymore because they don't make enough money or something.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me. They look like they were very big and lavish, but it's actually amazing the important historical role they play, because we're not just talking about an excuse to have a good time. Many of these fairs introduce such important technology, like in this particular exposition, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition of 1904? Yeah, so that was when many people were introduced to personal motor vehicles, even though they've been around for a little bit. Early forms of the wireless telephone and radio, electricity. Yes, they also included a lot of cultures of the world exhibits involving real-life humans, which most anthropologists these days agree are a little bit offensive and who to blame them. But I try to think more on the Thomas Edison side of the exposition.
Yeah, no, it was...
Exhibition or exposition?
Exposition, I think, because it's expo. So, yeah.
The exposition. What a shock.
And they used to be held all the time. I think the last one they said was actually held in Vancouver, like back in the 90s or something, and then there was no money in it then. And I guess with the advent of the internet and social media, you don't really need to sort of travel around to look at new things because they can bring it all into your home. So that's kind of a sad thing to lose. But
also, depending if you're wanting to get money or educate, it has many different aims. Like art fairs are quite interesting because until recently, like they were a popular way for contemporary galleries to, really, they'd basically have token shop fronts for the rest of the year, and most of their money was made in the big fairs.
Yeah, I mean, it's so the whole thing with Meet Me in St. Louis is, or St. Louis, depending on how you like to pronounce it, is, it's building up to this fair that's going to be in the city, all the lead up to it, and then the fair went on for quite a few months. It wasn't just sort of a week or so, anything like that. It went on for quite a while.
Well, they had whole new buildings, especially for it.
So at the end of the film, a bit of a spoiler alert, it's actually they did a grand set piece inside where all the family sort of congregates together and they're looking over at this beautiful new architectural building that was built for the fair. And I suppose back then the audience would have been aware of that. I believe it still does exist in St. Louis now, but St. Louis is unfortunately a very different city to what it was back then.
I think there's 2 or 3 buildings still around from that place.
Yeah, and I believe the zoo that they had there is still there, which is great. And there are... I was watching, actually, unfortunately, some true crime documentary that was in St. Louis, and the part of St. Louis that I went to wasn't that part, but you can still see the greenery and the park and all that sort of stuff from where this was set up. So essentially, the film is split up into sort of mini stories set around the girls. So it's Judy Garland and her sisters and her family. The girls, her and her older sister are navigating, life and love. Her the eldest sibling, the only boy in the family, Lon Jr., he's going off to college. But back then there was a big thing about preparing for marriage and the boy next door and all that sort of stuff. And then, of course, there were the 2 beautiful little sisters and the grumpy maid and the well-to-do mum and the hoity-toity dad and all the rest of it. So lots of your sort of staple characters of films in there. But this film's a musical as well. So it's not necessarily a linear story. It's just a set of snapshots out of the year in their life. There's a big set piece on Halloween with the 2 younger sisters. And then, of course, Christmas, spring. Yeah, and some beautiful songs. I
feel like when they were planning the Brady Bunch, the writer probably had that film a lot in mind because a lot of the, how should I put it, especially with the adults, the energies of different characters. So like you had talked about the smart talking maid and stuff, that all seems to be repeated in the Brady Bunch. Yeah,
well, yeah, actually, you're right. Ann B. Davis's character, it was very similar to the maid in this film. And I mean, it's such a gorgeous film. It's shot in Technicolor. The colours, the palette of the film is beautiful. Even the girls' hair, that auburn sort of hair, the 2 younger girls don't have it, but Judy Garland and the actress playing her sister, they have this beautiful coloured hair and these dresses and everything's so opulent, and you just can't help but fall in love with the whole thing because it's so stunning.
This is one of the first roles where Judy Garland actually got to portray a woman because... in an adult sense, because the studios tried to basically keep her as a child for ages.
Yeah, and also I was watching just a small excerpt of an interview with Liza Minnelli, of course, Judy Garland and Vincent Minnelli's only child and Judy's eldest daughter. And she said that obviously it's her favourite film because that's where her parents really spent their first lot of time together and fell in love and then got married and had her. So she's like, why wouldn't I love this film? But the other thing that she also said, all joking aside, was that her dad had actually photographed and presented her mother as a woman for the first time in her career and helped her make that transition to some older roles. Even though she was essentially playing an older teenager in the film, it's better than playing someone 12 or 13.
Yeah, well, when you think of how she was portrayed in Wizard of Oz, which was about 6 years earlier, so it's quite a difference.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, look, a lot of, older teenage or, into the mid-20s, they're often playing 16-year-olds. That still happens quite a lot now, but I suppose it's just trying to make that step over into playing adult characters. And we were actually discussing this before we went on air, that a lot of children don't make that switch, and probably the person in this film who played the fantastic character of Tootie and actually got an honorary Academy Award was Margaret O'Brien, and she was absolutely fantastic in this film, but she never really made the transition. She did a bit of TV when she was older, but largely retired and had a family.
Yeah, and it seems like you have to... because your adult self and your child self are two different people, so you almost have to approach your career anew.
Yes.
I mean... some people do the transition successfully, and they can be through both your how you change as a person, and obviously it probably helps to have contacts from earlier in life, but sometimes it's just a luck of the draw into how well you can transition. And unfortunately, we've seen many examples of where people haven't gone that well for purely professional reasons. Sometimes others, unfortunately, may get caught up in not knowing how to cope with being an adult, and they may fall into the party scene. So yeah, that's an unfortunate side effect sometimes. It makes you think, if you have a child and they say they want to be an actor, even assuming they succeed, do you want them to be at risk of a future like that?
Yeah, that's right. And also, a lot of them are mistreated on set. They're not treated the best, and there's been a whole spate of people who are now like my age and a bit older, like Corey Feldman, that came out and said some of the horrible experiences they had as children actors. And it's really a shame, because Margaret O'Brien is fantastic in this film, and she steals a lot of it just because she's so cute, especially the Halloween sequence that they do in this film.
How did you find the Halloween sequence? Because I found that to be like you said before, the film's basically divided into quarters, the 4 seasons. I found the autumn one was the one segment, like I said, around Halloween, where it's seemed a little strange to me. Maybe it's because it's using Halloween traditions that have gone out of fashion, but it just felt a bit unusual what they were getting up to.
Yeah, Halloween now is about junk food and this and that, and just being a bit crazy and running around the streets. But I guess back then there was a lot more folklore to it, like the bonfire, and
it was kind of very Lord of the Flies-ish.
Yeah, and even the way they were dressed, and Tootie had these, she was dressed like a little man, and she had this big long coat on, and the fact that they went out onto the street just on their own with the other kids, and they're all under about the age of 10 or so, and they're all just out there, near this bonfire, and now that just would not happen. The parents would not let the kids out like that. But I just thought that was one thing that struck me, because when the mother sent Agnes and Tootie off, have fun, girls, I was like, so she's not sort of supervising them. And it was a much different time. No one was expected to get grabbed off the street or anything, even though those things did happen. But, yeah.
I think the perception was that you only had to be careful when you were in a very rough inner city. So it's like how they kept talking about going into tenements when they moved to New York, but obviously they live in a very idyllic community there in that 1900s suburb, big houses with pretty stained glass windows, and they think what could go wrong. Yeah,
that's right. And I guess looking at the way the houses were then, a lot of them still had, gas light lamps in the house. How much would the doors have locked properly anyway? So I guess you were still sort of really out in the open, and you had to trust your neighbours back then, and you did. But the music in this film is fantastic. As Matt said, a very, very famous song that, lots of musical stars today and singers today sing, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which I wasn't sure how that fit into the movie. I thought that she'd she was going to sing it with the whole family around her, but it was just her and Tootie. It was quite moving, but I sort of thought it would be this big set piece at the end when they were all at the fair or something. But of course, the trolley song, and the film. It is a bit weird because it doesn't start somewhere and finish somewhere, and yet it does, because the girls, go through all these stages of love with their partners and getting married, and the brothers off at college and the little girls are growing up. So it does start somewhere and it does finish somewhere. It just has this because it's just told through a series of little fables and little vignettes. So it's not start finish. It's just like la 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 la. We're at Halloween. We're doing this. We're going to the fair, and then it all works out at the end.
Yeah, well, the St. Louis Fair. It's not really the purpose of the story. It's the MacGuffin. It's that inanimate X-plot element that is the big deal guiding the behavior of all the actors, because it kind of represents a microcosm their hometown.
Yes.
But it's for the audience, the bigger deal is what's going on with the actors in the household.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the musical score for the film was adapted by Roger Edens, and he was also one of the producers as well. So some of the songs in the film are very well-known songs that were historically around back then at the time of the St. Louis Exposition, and then there were others written for the movie. So Meet Me in St. Louis, or St. Louis, was written for the film. That's obviously starts the film off. The Boy Next Door, that was performed by Judy Garland in the film. And then there's ones like Skip to Maloo and stuff, which are sort of older classic ones. The trolley song was written for the film. And then, of course, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, written by Hugh Martin and Ralph Blaine. So, I mean, that song, I hear that in the pharmacy that I work in. I hear that song in the Christmas
Mariah Carey is earning her royalties now at this time of year.
That's right. Although, I have to say that All I Want for Christmas Is You, that is a great Christmas song. But, so just, songs that we know and we love. And this is just, I actually think a lot of little kids would get a lot of enjoyment out of this just because of the character of Tootie and how out there she is. Although didn't Margaret O'Brien, who's one of the last remnants of the golden Hollywood period, it's only the very young people now who were children at the time when all that was going on. Now they're in their sort of 80s. She was saying that someone had plotted to kidnap her or something, I was reading, because even though she's sort of been away from the limelight, once in a while she'll come out with a story of what happened.
Well, people do crazy things. I mean, somebody tried to kidnap Princess Anne all those decades later.
Yeah, it's just amazing. But look, it was very well received. It was the second highest grossing film of the year. And it's just, a fun film. It's a little silly, but a little serious in some parts too. And everyone in the film is just great. It was nice to see June Lockhart, who was playing the other girl on the scene with the sisters. She was playing Lucille. She actually, because we joke about Matt being the Jonathan Harris of this podcast, and Jonathan Harris, of course, was the guest star every week on Lost in Space, and June Lockhart was the mother on Lost in Space. So it was nice to see her.
I really saw the connection of dots like that you did just then as well.
Hey, I haven't yet mentioned Larry. I don't think I can mention Larry in these films other than the fact that he loved Christmas and dressing up like Santa Claus. So
I'm sure he watched them at some point.
And I'm sure he, with his mother being such a big musical star, I'm sure she had a crack at singing a lot of these songs because she had the voice and Larry didn't. So if we jump over to our next very famous Christmas movie, and I think I've seen one of the remakes of this with Mara Wilson in it. It came out in the 90s, but it's a film that can be remade because you can adapt it to modern audiences. It's Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, and we're going from the deep hues of Technicolor into a black and white story, although that worked. I could imagine it in colour, but I think it worked pretty well for this film. So what were your initial thoughts on this 1947 film, Matt?
Well, I'd only ever till this past week seen the one made with in the 90s with with the girl from Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah,
and,
I think it's Mara Wilson, I think her name is. Yeah,
and Richard Attenborough as Santa Claus. Obviously, I've researched the character name so well.
Yeah.
And the actor name so well. I didn't have as high expectations. I thought Meet Me in St. Louis would be my favorite, but no, I really love Miracle on 34th Street. It's such... it's so... heart-pulling. I like the sentiment that brings it forth, because this is kind of the first that first period where Santa Claus as we know him was becoming the consumer cliche, because it wasn't really until maybe the 1920s onwards that he came to know Santa as the red-wearing gift bearer, and actually a lot of his traditional costume that we think of now is thanks to Coca-Cola's ads, because they dressed him up in their company colours.
Yes, that's true.
The place that St. Nicholas has had in Christmas has varied a lot over many centuries in different places. Like in the 19th century in parts of Eastern Europe, it used to be a thing to have somebody dressed as him with sort of pretend demons going around.
Oh, okay.
Because if you see a production of the Nutcracker, that's how they show him. Because he's walking around with these demons, because he's such a great virtuous character, he's able to make demons feel the joy of giving.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of folklore around Santa, St. Nicholas, lots of different Western countries, and obviously other Eastern countries would have their own version of this type of gift-giving person that comes around, not at Christmas time. Well, you know what
the origin of Santa actually was? Because there was a real person called Nicholas, I believe, who lived in what is now Turkey, and apparently out of a random act of charity, he secretly donated to a poor man the dowries for his several daughters, which was quite a big deal, because it was like what you needed to get married, and because without that, they'd have been sold into slavery. We are talking I think pre-Roman times.
Oh, wow, okay. So it's sort of a fable that sort of kicked off. And
the point is, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So this is a Christmas classic. It is something that's always, especially in the US, it's replayed, on all the old film networks as Christmas comes up. So essentially the story is Edmund Gwenn is an old man, Kris Kringle, going around New York City, and at the last minute he has to fill in for the usual Santa at the very famous Macy's annual Thanksgiving Day parade, because that Santa's intoxicated and doesn't really care, so this guy steps in, and he's a hit because when he's appearing, he's then hired to be like the in-store Santa and speaking to all the kids, and then he starts telling the customers, oh, well, if we don't have it here, you should go somewhere else. And rather than that off-putting the customers like, well, thanks for that. I actually got sort of what I needed, and I think this is a great store if you can recommend going other places and you don't mind sharing the business around. And then he actually, Chris's character, so Edmund Gwenn's character, says he actually is really Santa Claus. And then we get into sort of a bit more of a serious tone with a court case to determine his mental health. And then, is he or is he not Santa Claus? And there's definitely a big question mark about that.
I don't understand why the lawyer defending him, who's Maureen O'Hara's love interest, why don't they just go to the court registry office and have him legally change his name to Kris Kringle? Problem solved.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the great things about this film, Edmund Gwenn is fantastic, and the sentiment of this film is fantastic, and there are some serious sort of, talking about people's mental health, their capacities, what they believe in, what they choose to believe in, your attitude towards certain things. But I really think Natalie Wood, a lot like Margaret O'Brien, was the scene stealer in this film. I mean, she was fantastic. She played this haughty little girl so well, and didn't agree with playing with the kids because they made stuff up, and she was fantastic. And you forget that she was only 43 when she accidentally drowned. Obviously, the events of that are still suspicious to this day.
Let's just hope that until around... Let's just hope that this part of her life was a good period.
Yeah, that it was. Now, we do know that her parents were Russian immigrants, and her mother in particular was very determined to see her daughter become a star, and she did. And you don't know if that's played into some of Natalie's health challenges and some issues, especially when she remarried Robert Wagner, etc., etc. But her mother was a very pushy stage mother, and that is a very well-known fact. So she was acting and modelling since she was a young girl. I guess they're immigrants. Her mother saw the chance at making money, stardom, and Natalie certainly did that. But I think sometimes that gets overshadowed by the fact that she was a really good little performer and a good actress, a good child actress.
Yeah, I mean, the performances by Edmund and Maureen and all those are great, but this is one film where the child actor really pulls it along, because sometimes that's what's hard to find, I think, with child actors, is that because they're children, they may not sort of have that special zing on the camera that more experienced adults would have, but she did.
She did, yeah, because she
Well,
seemed
that's to the dictionary, the zing.
Well, she did have that zing because, let's face it, a lot of children they just imitate how the adults tell them to say the lines, and that's fine, but she seemed to have a real understanding of what at least it came across on the screen. I'm sure she was coached, but of what her character was, how she was, and, and her sort of changes in the film, and that shows a lot of maturity. I can't think of any modern day. I mean, there were the last spate of really good child actors were back in sort of the 90s, as far as I'm concerned. You had we mentioned Mara Wilson and some of the people that worked with her. She was great. Haley Joel Osment. I mean, he still does act now, but the gravitas he had as a child, it just unfortunately hasn't seemed to translate as an adult. But
well, Macaulay Culkin was great,
yeah.
But that was in more of a comic slapstick acting. It was different quality. Natalie Portman, especially, I think my favourite part of hers in the whole film was when she's in the apartment and Santa's explaining to her the concept of what imagination can be, and just the parts where she has no lines and is just sort of looking in bewilderment. Those are the parts that really test you as an actor, and she passed with flying colours.
Yeah, exactly. And Margaret O'Brien in the film previous that we were discussing, Meet Me in St. Louis, yeah, she was the same. She was actually, Margaret O'Brien was saying, because in the film, she looked like she was crying real tears. I mean, her face was red and it was sort of matching up to her emotions and stuff. It didn't look like they'd just put some liquid tears in her eyes or something like that, or some peppermint or something to make her eyes well up. But she said that, Margaret said that she felt it was a competition between her and some other actresses who was the best crier, and she really wanted to do it as authentically as she could. So she was crying real tears in that film, when she alleged that she'd been hurt or, tooth got knocked out or whatever. She was crying real tears, and, they were taking, they were doing method acting and they didn't even know they were doing method acting. And it's just so beautiful and genuine to sort of see these two young girls, absolutely stunning and beautiful. One who's still with us, Margaret's still with us. She's 84 now. Unfortunately, Natalie left us many years ago. But, just to see these two beautiful kids really steal the show. And I'm not saying that they couldn't be bratty and all the rest of it. I'm sure they probably could, hanging around with a lot of adults, because the two of them made a lot of films when they were kids. But it just, I don't know, there's something really genuine about the two of them that you don't see anymore. So on the basis of seeing the two girls in these films, I highly recommend both of them. You'll get different things out of both films, but yeah.
Yeah, did you have a favourite out of the two?
Probably just Meet Me in St. Louis, just because of the musical stuff that I loved, and also because I love Halloween. There was a big Halloween sequence in that. But I have to say that I enjoyed Miracle on 34th Street a lot more than I thought I was going to. I don't know, for some reason I thought it wouldn't really interest me, but it really did. But what interested me in the film was probably mostly Natalie's character. I really loved her character in the film. I love the two little girls in these films because they were just so cute, and the outfits that they had on, even how Tootie was dressed and her sisters were dressed, and when they went swimming and the whole apparel that they had to wear. And you just think back, I don't know, I'm very much sort of a modern woman. I'm very much a tomboy. But I look back at those times and I know there was oppression for women, but it just seemed a lot more simpler and straightforward for a woman back then. And there's something sort of comforting about that, because it's almost like being a woman now, and I'm very much the essence of a modern woman. You know, I'm the least sort of domesticated woman that you can get. But I look back then and I sometimes think to myself, it doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad way to live.
Well, I think even for both men and women as well, life was treated at that time kind of like when you open a biology book and you're reading the life cycle of a butterfly or a frog going from the tadpole to the pond and everything. And I think everybody was just taught that life was meant to follow that same very clear cycle. And there were certain unique qualities of happiness tied into that way of life that you just don't have now.
Yes, I agree.
We tend, hindsight is 20/20. We tend to always view it, the further you go back, the worse it is. But most people do tend to look back fondly on their own time.
Yeah, it's
So
almost
it's
like
a matter
now women seem to have too many options and they're just pulled in too many different directions. And it's...
Well, I'm not going to fall into the Handmaid's Tale trap.
No, that's fine.
I'll leave you to deal with the Twitter bombardment for that.
No, that's fine. But I can say this as a woman, and but it just you knew what you had to do and you just got on and you just did it. And even though there were probably tough things and there was discrimination and all the rest of it, every woman was kind of in the same boat back then, so you just got on and did it. And I understand there was also, other racial discriminations and other elements that were not sort of addressed in these films. I completely understand that. But there was also, I always remember working at a job and I was speaking to a working mother on the phone, and she even said to me, because she was trying to balance out care for her kids and this and that, she was running to and from her job and trying to pick her kids up, and she even said to me, she said, sometimes this women's liberation thing hasn't worked out exactly the way we wanted it to, because I think, even for men, it's hard enough to come to work and then come home and try to be a part of the household, but especially for women, because there's that such pull to be with your children and just be there for them all the time. And unfortunately, financial issues now and stuff mean that that's not always possible, so it really often is. So, but it's just nice, knowing what you have to do and you just get on and do it.
I guess so, but then I hope one film we'll get to one day do is Carrie, which had Laurence Olivier in it, and that kind of shows though how if you by any kind of accident or certain choices made out of necessity, if that could send you off the bad path if you couldn't quite fit the mold at the time.
Yeah, well, that would be probably applicable to me. I probably would have ended up living some sort of Albert Nobbs sort of lifestyle, dressing up as a man or something. But, just because my natural interests and stuff would probably be in more masculine-dominated areas. And even though I've tried them in my life, they don't want a girl around in a mechanic shop and stuff. So, obviously, and I'm in my 40s too, it might be different now for a girl in her 20s. But, so that was something I kind of found interesting with the film. Although Maureen O'Hara's character, she was quite, seemed like a bit of a go-getter and a bit of a career woman too. So, yeah.
I was actually impressed how open they were that Maureen O'Hara's character was divorced, and the daughter herself said that was how it happened, because at that period, and this was actually why the film got apparently a B rating or something by the Catholic Legion of Decency, which was this huge ratings classification board the church had at the time.
Right.
But that's they didn't have some flimsy pretext of, because I think this was made shortly after World War II, so they could have just easily said, I don't have a dad, he died in Pearl Harbor or something. Yeah, actually you're right about that. And even though these two films were made within years of each other, they're set in very different eras. One is actually
contemporary to the time it was made, Miracle on 34th Street, and then, of course, Meet Me in St. Louis was set 40 years before the film was shot. So
it seems so distant to us now, but what do you think? Well, that's just like a film now been set in the 80s.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And things have changed a lot, and I can attest to that quite a lot since then. There were still a lot of stay-at-home mums back in the 80s, and now that's not really, but it's also a matter of finances and how the world's changed as well. So, but two outstanding films for different reasons. And if you like a good, feel-good Christmas film, even though there are some sad parts in these films, I think you'll get them from Miracle on 34th Street and Meet Me in St. Louis.
Well, I won't say what, but I've seen or overseen a few newer Christmas films made on streaming services that shall remain nameless, and I'm like, who wrote these? Like they're like kids. They're like they're like kids films made for adults, and I'm like, God. How did the actors and the crew and the set designers and everything get together and not at some point say, what are we doing?
Yeah.
This is crap.
I mean, I don't mind because I can't stand a lot of... Even though I do watch horror films, but I guess that's a particular type of genre. But modern films, I just can't stand all the swearing. I can't stand all the senseless violence that doesn't mean anything to anyone. So,
well, this is the complete opposite of thinking, but it's like such a...
Yeah, so I think the films that Matt's talking about are like the Hallmark or the Lifetime channel in the US, their sorts of films. And their films are the only films I can really watch, modern films that I can watch now, because they don't demand anything of you. You just sort of sit there and whatever. And a lot of actors I like are in these films, so I just that's him. I loved him back in the day. So that's the only reason I watch them. But they don't really demand anything of you. But I have to say, I have to get dragged to go to the cinema now. Hence the reason we started this podcast. But I just do not watch any modern films now. I just don't enjoy any of them.
Well, there have been lists that I felt in recent times that I must see. Like when I think of it, probably the last film that I had the real urge to see on my own was a Girl on a Train, and that's like almost 5 years ago now.
Yeah, I think there's only one film I think I'm looking forward to, and I think that's the new Top Gun film, and that's simple. I can't imagine it'll be like the first one, but
I must see the original.
Yeah, it's just for nostalgia. I mean, Top Gun's just like an overlong music video, but it's very much. It's 1986. It's very much of the time. Reminds me of when I was a kid. So I will see that, but. Honestly, I think my sister's trying to drag me to something on Boxing Day, and I was like, oh, and she goes, I'll give it a chance. It'll be all right. I'm like, it's set in the 80s, so I think I will give it a chance. But, whereas with these older films, it's really only like modern TV, made-for-TV films I can watch now. I really cannot watch anything at the cinema, so that's why it's great to have all these great old films to watch.
Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of an unwritten rule that quality long-term tends to follow where the money is, so just... sniff out the gold and find the quality at the end.
Well, thank you, everyone. We've had a lovely year chatting with you, and thank you for joining our conversations, because that's essentially what they are. We don't do these big, long, professional blah, 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 and this happened at this time. There's plenty of other people out there that do those sorts of podcasts, and we just love having a general chat about the films, the actors, the pop culture of the time. There's always so many different ways to approach films and discussions of them. It doesn't always have to be about the best directing or cinematography. It can just be about a feeling that you have about a film and why you like it, or an era of a film, or an actor or a director, or just beautiful songs in a film that we had with one of the films that we discussed today. So we will be just taking a short hiatus, just, Christmas. I mean, I work all through Christmas. Matt has, a lot of baking to do, don't you? Or...
Yes, I'm sort of 2 out of 6 baking items. One year I got a sore back because I basically spent a whole month standing in the kitchen. Yeah,
so Matt's a big baker. He loves it, and his whole family are amazing cooks as well. His sister, his mum and dad, his fiancé, everyone's a great cook in Matt's house. A big kitchen that's always used. And I look forward to sampling your gluten-free cookies.
Yes, I'm sorry I forgot to bring the plate this morning. No. I had it right next to my keys and wallet, and I just forgot them.
I know. I hate it when I do things like that, but that's fine. I can always drop by, or we'll have a quick catch-up before Christmas. So we will see you shortly in the new year. We haven't sort of finalised the date. Of course, we do have our other podcast that we do, A Glimpse of Hell, which is our true crime, sort of more focusing sort of on historical true crime figures.
I think it would have been harder to do a Christmas special for that one.
Although I'm sure there probably is someone that we might have a look and see if there's a New Year Christmas type of. Although we did have somebody in mind for our next podcast, so we will do that at the same time. Oops, sorry, I'm playing around with the microphone now. And we'll see you early in the new year. So we'll start the new year off strong with James Cagney double. We are going to do Public Enemy, 1931, one of his most famous films, and then I wanted to do White Heat, but then I thought, White Heat and Public Enemy are probably a little bit too similar, even though they were shot at different times in his career. So we're going to do Yankee Doodle Dandy, which I did see as a child, but in 1942, which I do want to revisit, and and hopefully just get to watch some other films over my downtime over the period as well, and check in with you back early in the new year.
Yeah, well, I look forward to getting to know more of Jimmy for the next episode, because he's one that has been mentioned by old actors of his generation as one of those greats that people forget about, and in a couple of situations, like on the old Parkinson type interviews, and so I've been interested to get to know him better. And he was one of the handful of people that was given the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award, so it's got to say something.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, other
than the fact that they left it too late.
Didn't they do that with Alfred Hitchcock as well?
Yes. When he's sort of too stroked out to hold the statue award, you've left it a bit late.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you for joining us for our conversations. My numerous mentions about Larry Hagman that have absolutely nothing to do mostly with the podcast. But, that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, well, I can't believe this is now our second Christmas special.
I know. We started this at the start of the pandemic, or just as it was unfortunately kicking off, if you want to use that as a term. And it's just something we enjoy doing anyway. And, hopefully we'll start getting a bit more into different social media things that we can have a bit more conversations. We'd actually love to have a chat with some of you about your favourite films and stuff. So in the meantime, as always, have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, however you choose to celebrate it. I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies. Thank you and all the best.